So what did you guys, did you read the manifestos? What did you think about them? There were two of them. Yeah, so on Tuesday we were supposed to have read the Dada and the Futurist one. And then for today, we're supposed to read Laboria, Cuboniks, the Feminist Manifesto, and the All Woke Manifesto. And then there was a piece that was an introduction to Accelerationism, which they're both accelerative manifestos. But anyways, so those are the two manifestos we're supposed to read today. Any thoughts about them at the outset?
So I read the acceleration one, but I'm not sure I understood it. Can you just give that like a brief summarization of it?
Was that the introduction to Accelerationism?
Yeah, it was the quick and dirty introduction to acceleration.
Yes, I'm just going to go into this then. So, Accelerationism okay, so at the start of the semester we read the Communist Manifesto. It comes out in 1848. It's a diagnosis of the problems of capitalism. Karl Marx, in 1848 as well, was giving a speech on free trade. And what he says is that the protective system of our day is conservative, meaning protectionist measures where different countries have to pay tariffs if they want to trade with each other, etc., or when countries try to protect their own industries, is an inherently conservative thing. While the free trade system is destructive. The free trade system is destructive because it breaks up old nationalities, and it pushes the antagonism of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie to the extreme point. In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. It is in this revolutionary sense alone that I vote in favor of free trade. That's a pretty complicated argument. So what he's saying is that, and this is kind of, Marx, remember how Marx felt counterintuitively, if you haven't read Marx, you probably think that Marx thinks the bourgeoisie is a conservative group. No, Marx thinks the bourgeoisie is a revolutionary group that is consistently changing society and is always making things different. And that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is, we didn't have car to goes 4 years ago, I just drove a car to go to class. That's what capitalism is, right? It's a completely different system of relations that's continually being introduced to produce profit. For a critic of capitalism, like Karl Marx, you would think that you would want to stop capitalism from doing that, right? Like, stop it, freeze it, so it doesn't keep producing these further exploitative relationships. What's interesting in this section is that he's saying free trade is actually really destructive. It breaks down all these different types of relationships. Suddenly in Italy, you can have tomatoes, which were a new world crop, for instance. We think about Italian cuisine being based around tomatoes. In fact, tomatoes are not indigenous to Italy at all. So it's only because Christopher Columbus came to the New World that an agricultural crop like tomatoes came to Italy, therefore forever changing their food culture to the point that we have a completely different view of Italian food culture. So in that manner, free trade really changes society. You can have anything at any point. We can have bananas anytime that we want to. It doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't be able to have a banana any time of the year in Ohio. And so Karl Marx was saying that he's in favor of free trade because he thinks that the worse this gets, the quicker we'll get to communism. Because the more workers will be exploited, the more workers will want to raise up against capitalists. So the way that this is often reduced is like, it has to get worse to get better. Okay, this is a new. I should preface all this. Accelerationism is only about 10 years old. The way that people talk about it, the way I'll be talking about it, but it has antecedents, which is kind of what we're talking about now. This is not really what accelerationists think, but this is basically the main idea. Accelerate the contradictions in capitalism, and you'll get through the bad parts of it. This argument takes two different turns. There's a left accelerationist and a right accelerationist. And I'll be talking about this throughout the presentation. Okay. In the 70s, there are two philosophers named Deleuze and Guattari. Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. And their idea that they contribute is an idea of territorialization and deterritorialization. Territorialization is basically like when you have a steady state. So for instance, in your house, when you turn on not the thermometer, but what's it called?
Thermostat?
The thermostat, right. When you turn on the thermostat in your house, it keeps your house at the same temperature. Now the temperature outside might change, but if it changes, then your thermostat will turn on your heat, and it'll keep what's inside of your house the same. So that's the kind of way of talking about a steady state economy or a fixed economy, an economy that doesn't really change very much. What deterritorialization is the opposite. It's the state of always changing. It's characterized by self-reinforcing errancy, flight, or escape. So, deterritorialization of the economy, the constant change, the constant revolution in the economy, where more and more things are more and more things are changed by capitalism, more and more things are uprooted, families are uprooted, social relationships are uprooted, institutions are uprooted. This is deterritorialization. Deterritorialization is what accelerationists are kind of talking about. So Deleuze and Guattari say they ask, which is the revolutionary path? Is there one? Is it to withdraw from the world market, or maybe, and to be further and further protectionist, to be further and further isolationist? Or is it instead to go in the opposite direction, to go all the way into free trade, as Marx was talking about it? To go further still into decoding and deterritorialization, for perhaps the flows are not yet deterritorialized enough, not decoded enough. So Deleuze and Guattari are saying maybe what's more evolutionary is to accelerate the process. And this is kind of where that term comes from. And the idea here is that the only way out of capitalism is through it. Now, I know this might sound all like economic theory or Marxist theory, and that's all well and good, but in point of fact, this has actually been one of the most influential ideas in contemporary artwork. Many, many people in contemporary artwork right now who are more or less of my age, like right around 30, are making work that's based in accelerationism. And they're doing it because they see a way out of current day problems through technology and through post-humanism, basically. So it's a way that they think that through accelerated technological processes, through accelerated social dysfunction, through new ways of being in the world, whether that's new ways of being gender, new ways of being human, new ways of being online, or like new ways of being cybernetic, that the only way out of current day is through these new deterritorializations that are coming into the economy. And so they often make artwork about this issue. Our current understanding of accelerationism in the left and right, and in the sort of feminist iteration of the left, comes from a group of researchers in Warwick, which is in the UK, in the 90s. And what they were interested in, raves. They were interested in the internet, which was just starting. They were interested in techno. They were interested in everything cyber, basically. And then they were also interested in postmodern theory through like Deleuze and Marx. So they start this group called the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, and it's not just writing, and it's not just an academic department. They're hosting a lot of events, they're making records, they have a record label, they are throwing raves, they are blogging. Mark Fisher became famous for his blog, and they're theorizing. So Sadie Plant was probably the most famous person in the 90s, and she was kind of the head of it. And then Mark Fisher was pretty famous in the early 2000s, and then he actually killed himself a couple years ago. And then Nick Land is currently like a notorious figure. Basically, Mark Fisher represented more or less a socialist version of these issues. Sadie Plant was interested in cyberfeminism, and then Nick Land is kind of at this point, like a right-wing guy, but he's writing through Marx, and he's writing through Deleuze, and he's interested in all the same topics, but he looks at it through a right-wing lens, and he is interested in reasserting old forms of social hierarchies and technological singularities that would displace human power through accelerationist proposals. Because remember, accelerationism, if it has to get worse before it can get better, this is going to be something that right-wing people can be interested in too, right? And this is the controversy of accelerationism. It's one of the really weird things about so many artists and musicians being interested in it. If you actually think that the contradictions of capitalism have to accelerate because they're already bad, then you're basically advocating for a lot of social damage to happen. And how people deal with that contradiction is what makes them either left or right accelerationist. So those are the main figures. And how this kind of gets boiled down to right now, for instance, this is kind of like a popular, this was written by some artists and emailed anonymously to different people. I got this in a couple different emails right after the election. And then it was posted online. And it's basically like a common understanding of some of the accelerationist tropes, but it's positioned to directly respond to the election. And they're trying to figure out what's going on with the election, because it was kind of confusing, but there were two main forces that were coming up. It was this liberalization of identity politics, which used to be radical, and it was also the extreme, the opposite, the identitarian kind of right-wing version of identity politics that used memes and kind of infected the right in terms of the alt-right. This is the most interesting line here. For these people, culture is more important than policy. And a lot of the people who are invested in this political program aren't politicians. They're not economists. This is mostly still in the realm of academics and culture and artists and musicians and people like this. One line that I'll return to is they're advocating for mimetic counter-insurrection, culture damning through memes, to use memes to impart ideology. And then they talk about xenofeminism, which we'll be talking about later in the Laboria Cuboniks essay. And the need to, if nature is oppressive, to change nature, into queer nature. And they're advocating, and in all the pieces that we read about accelerationism, and that I'll be talking about, they're advocating for globalism. They don't want local solutions. They want global solutions. Okay. And this is more on memes. So this is an idea, this is indicative of how accelerationists and techno-utopians are talking about technology. Think back to the futurists, right? The futurists were looking at all the new technology that came out, the electrification of the cities, the speed of trains, the speed of cars, and they're looking at it in 1909, and they're trying to not only advocate for it, but they're putting so much faith into it that they think it's going to be the end-all, be-all, and if they think that any technological process is going to be therefore good because it is technology. So the people who are coming out of the internet and in the accelerationist era are doing the same types of things. They compare themselves to open source software. Like Laboria Cuboniks, the xenofeminist Manifesto compares itself to open source software. They advocate for using memes. They're saying memes are ideologies distilled, repackaged, and ready for viral distribution. The internet is something of an AI, an artificial intelligence, a communication network operating as its own sovereign entity. Social media platforms and other communication technologies accelerate the flow of ideas, bypassing restrictions put in place by traditional media. And then they give this illustration. A journalist in New York may engage with a senator in Washington over Twitter. A misguided 17-year-old from Wisconsin who received their political education from Poll, which is a Reddit group, Breitbart or Reddit, or Poll is on 4chan, sorry, can also join that same dialogue and disrupt it. This is the best case scenario, unfortunately. Ideology is a mimetic virus. Memes are an insurgent medium. The internet is an insurgent technology. So they're looking at everything that happened in the 2016 election, which if you remember right afterwards, there were all of these think pieces about how we all live in media bubbles and how Facebook was overrun by bots from Russia and how the alt-right, this is Richard Spencer's quote, that the alt-right was memed into existence on 4chan and on Reddit. And there's a large degree of truth to that. The left accelerationist position that the All-Work Manifesto is talking about is to say, we see how susceptible current political discussion is because it's online to things like memes, to things like Twitter discourse, to things like chat rooms. And what we need to do is accelerate the flow of ideas through memes, which distill our ideology. So this is like considering that memes are just words and pictures that are online, and they're saying here that that is what changed the political reality. As art students, whose life is about combining images and words and things like this, you can see how there's this large interplay between culture and art, and then also the political reality, the social reality that people are getting out of it, and how the internet and technology is a mediator for it. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to be talking about left accelerationism first, and that was kind of a part of left accelerationism. And I'm going to be talking about so you know how I was describing the manifesto, the art manifesto assignment, and I was saying that you need to diagnose a problem, and then you need to explain how you're going to fix it. Okay, in this piece, which we didn't have to read, but is important online, this is the Accelerate Manifesto. And one of the things they do in diagnosing the current position of left politics and social relations is they diagnose the problem of folk politics. And they say that for too long, people who wanted to change the world were too invested in local issues. So you can think about this as being like a co-op. And you can think about it as being one protest march. Or you can think about it as being like, I used to run a punk house, which was like a collective housing group where we had really cheap rent and we threw a lot of events and we advocated for different political positions. They're saying that localism and direct action, what they call folk politics, has to go away. Because instead of facing real problems, real global economic issues, which are intrinsically non-local, abstract, and rooted in everyday infrastructure, that people choose these kind of projects which they can see actually happening in their day-to-day life, right? Like, when I go to a protest, I can see that I'm actually doing it. And yet, at the end of the protest, nothing's changed. Nothing about me protesting a global issue has changed it when I go to a local protest. It's too diffuse. The strategy doesn't match up with the problem. Instead, it becomes something where I feel like I did something, but in reality, it's unclear what I just did. Okay. And they're saying that the failure of such politics was built into them from the beginning. But by contrast, an accelerationist politics seeks to preserve, this is really important, accelerationists see the things that capitalism did that are good. For instance, new technologies, making the internet is the big one for people in my generation, social media, etc., as being positive things capitalism has given us, and they want to preserve those, while still going further than the value system, the governance structure, and the mass pathologies of capitalism will allow. So it wants to keep things like globalism, market economies have given us, for instance, the iPhone, but it wants to get rid of problems like mass poverty that capitalism brings with it. But it doesn't see reverting to local politics as being something that will help. Okay, I want to play a video for you that will show you what the current articulation of the left accelerationist program is about. And these are like the actual political goals that this person articulates.
What is full automation? Which is admittedly a very polemical demand. You can't literally have full automation. But we do want to automate things that right now capitalism isn't automating, that are really terrible jobs, but it can find people, cheap laborers to do it. So look at a lot of manufacturing done in China, people working in Foxconn where they've had to introduce suicide nets on the side of the buildings to keep people from killing themselves at work. Why do we have people doing those terrible jobs when we can automate them? So full automation is sort of a push for to get some of these terrible jobs gone. Our second demand is a reduced working week. So I always suggest a 3-day weekend for everybody, which is, we already have long weekends and people love them. So we can already build off that sort of existing thing that we have. It also helps with climate change. So there was a study done in America where they looked at if we reduce the American working week down to the level of the average European working week, we would save about 20% of energy costs in America. So one less day of people commuting, one less day of factories running, one less day of offices running. This saves a huge amount of energy. And I think if we want to deal with climate change, we have to be talking about a reduced working week. Our third demand is for a universal basic income. So this is the idea that the government provides everybody with a basic amount of money that allows you to survive, no questions asked. So no conditionalities on it. It doesn't matter if you're looking for jobs, it doesn't matter if you went out to a party last night and had a whole bunch of drugs or anything, it doesn't matter. The government still gives you this money. So this allows people to then freely choose how they want to spend their time. If you want more money, you can go out and you can find a job, but you can choose to work, say, 10 hours, you can choose to work 40 hours, you can decide what you want. You have the freedom to make that choice. So on an individual level, it gives people a lot of power that they don't have right now. So if we're lucky, I think, we sometimes have a choice over which job to take, but unless we're independently wealthy, we don't have a choice over taking a job or not. With the basic income, we suddenly have that freedom. I think that's a really important freedom. The final demand that we make in the book then is to reduce the work ethic. So the one issue that always comes up when I tell people about the sort of post-work idea is that, well, don't people love work? Isn't this, what we value as a society is work? I think that's absolutely right, but that's really problematic. So when you meet somebody for the first time, you ask them, what do you do? You never meet like, what are your hobbies? It's never like, oh, I practice guitar, practice musical skills in my free time or something. It's always, what is your job? That's what people mean. So this is, I think, really problematic. I think, the political hurdles, the economic...
Okay, so what, so that's kind of like a pretty, what do you guys think about that? Can you see why, what about what we've been talking about leads to those problems, or leads to those political ideas?
To me, it seems like a little bit Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
His ideas, it may seem like he's trying to make life the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
yeah. So that's true. The reason why this program comes into play now is that automation. Do we know what automation is? What's automation? What does it mean to you?
I was not raising my hand. So in my classes.
Okay.
But, just like
Okay.
Just like taking, well, quote unquote, taking jobs away from people that machines can do.
Exactly. And it's named after automats, right? And these were ubiquitous in like mid-century New York, the automat. And what you would do is you would go in, and then you would put in a quarter, and you would get a pie, or you'd get a cup of coffee. So automation, well, at least the automat's named after automation. They share the same root. But this is basically the automating of everything. And it's one of the reasons why there aren't like as many industrial jobs as there were. It's because every time a better machine comes in and is able to reduce the workers that are needed, then those workers no longer have jobs, but the same thing is still being performed. Automation it comes in waves. For instance, in the 30s, the government subsidized a lot of, for instance, 50% of America were engaged in the agricultural sector even, I think, in 1920. How many people do you know that are farmers? No. Does anyone know a farmer? You know farmers. 2 people know farmers. 3 people know farmers. How many farmers do you know?
Actually, he doesn't fully rely on farming, so I don't know if that counts.
Okay.
Probably like 5 or 6.
5 or 6. How many people do you know?
What do you mean?
In your life, how many people do you?
Oh, I kind of live in a rural environment, so I've known quite a few, but
Yeah.
I don't think I can count how many.
How many Facebook friends do you have?
Like 200 something.
Okay. All right. Well, in the past, you have 200 Facebook friends. 100 of those people would have been in the agricultural sector. The reason why so many people don't work in the agricultural sector anymore is because of automation. And then in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, that happened to a lot of the industrial sectors of the American economy. And then free trade also made a lot of those kind of jobs move offshore as well. The reason why I'm talking about this, and the reason why he's talking about it in that piece, is that the current mainstream economic crisis that even people like Charlie Rose or centrist mainstream commentators talk about is the oncoming issue of automation. They're seeing that technology is now at a place where even formerly white-collar information technology jobs that people thought could never be automized will be automized. You can even think about this in terms of, in universities. Every time that a regular class becomes an online talk class, it may seem like, well, this is just a different type of class and there's still a teacher of it. But in fact, usually what happens is that there were 4 classes, and now there's 1 class. So 3 of those classes and 3 jobs are now not there because of automation, because of technology. So the accelerationists who see that technology is making available all these ways to automate jobs see an oncoming social disaster. And what they see is there's going to be, today the real unemployment number is like 12%. The one that you get from the government's 5%. But they see a future where it's going to be at Great Depression levels. It's going to be 25. It's going to be 30. And it's going to be permanent. It's not going to be because there's an economic depression. It's going to be because technology has made a large part of our population surplus workers. They're not needed in the economy. So a left accelerationist who believe that technology is good, they have a problem. If you believe that technology is good, but you're a Marxist, like you said that he was, you're left with an issue where there's going to be more and more people that don't have an ability to pay for themselves and have lives that are worth living. And so Nick Srnicek and Alex Williams' solution in the Accelerate Manifesto is to not just try and block automation, but it's actually to accelerate automation. They say, we shouldn't just accelerate jobs that are going to benefit capital. We should accelerate every job we should automate every job that we can. Because why should people be working jobs like the Foxconn factory in China that Apple has, where there's suicide nets because they're worried about workers killing themselves because their jobs are so bad. They live in a building and they don't leave. They're there 7 days a week, etc. Basically sweatshop conditions. They're saying we shouldn't just automate some of the jobs that are going to be automated anyways. We should automate all the bad jobs, which would eliminate a lot of human misery. And then they're saying that we should reduce working hours for everyone else. That way we can equitably distribute the rest of the jobs that are around. And that this will be made possible by giving everybody a universal basic income, which happens in some places. And even in America until 1994, if you didn't have a job, they would give you just money. A UBI would be it wouldn't be welfare. It would be every single citizen would get a check. It would probably be like $1,500 or $2,000 a month. And it would be paid for by higher taxes on the rich, etc., higher taxes on corporations. And then they're saying that there needs to be a cultural movement away from thinking of yourself as the job you perform, and instead thinking of yourself as your social relationships, as your hobbies, as what you like to read. So this is the left accelerationist program. It sees the problem coming because of technology, and instead of saying that we should try and stop it through protest, they're saying, actually, we should accelerate it and just direct it in a way that's going to be good for humans afterward. Because we can't stop technology. All we can do is regulate it and direct it to our benefit. Okay, from here, I'm going to show you the. Oh, whoops. Whatever. I'm going to show you the. Feminist tech utopian version of left accelerationism, which is made by an art group. And it's 6 women. They met in Berlin, and they made this group, which we read the manifesto of today. So their program is very related to the left accelerationist one that we just saw, but it differs in certain emphasis that it has. Okay. What they're arguing for is really interesting in the context of feminism that comes out of postmodernism, which is kind of the last iteration. So they start with the proposition that, the same kind of proposition that Srnicek and Alex Williams, the same problem that they were identifying. Technology is happening, capitalism is happening. Science is happening and technology is happening. They are all advancing, whether or not we want them to, or whether or not in our ideal world that they would be. More technology is being made, and they start with that initial issue. First, they decide, unlike a lot of postmodernists, postmodern feminist reading, they don't think that science or rationality or empirical reality is inherently patriarchal or inherently masculine. They think that rationality has no gender. And they think not only does it have no gender, but that it's actually feminist. It must be a feminist proposition if we're going to see the kind of world that we need to have. And one of the ways that they get to this point, which I think is really important, is that Laboria Cuboniks are women, but they're queer women, trans women, and they are really invested in the idea of gender hacking, of using available technology and available medical technology to become the gender that you feel you are, for instance, and to manipulate. They think that just because you're born in a certain way doesn't mean that that's the last state you need to be in. They want people to find their ideal way of being in the world. And with this kind of conception of, and with the availability and kind of increasing accessibility to, for instance, transitioning, etc., with those kind of technologies, that leads them to a position where they say, if nature is bad, and we have the technology to change nature, then we should change nature. Not just in the sense of changing the nature of the scientific field that is too masculine now, not just changing that, though they want to do that, changing yourself if you want to change yourself, changing your urban area if you feel like the architecture of it doesn't help you, and changing online communication if you feel like it's not representing what you want. Another thing that they really want to change is the universal subject. The universal subject till now is the white male, middle class, cis heterosexual subject. They want to change it. Instead of, so a lot of people who see that universal as being problematic retreat into specific identities, right? And they reject that. They reject the current formulation of identity politics. They don't want to retreat into an identity. They want to change the universal. They want to change what the universal subject is thought to be in Western discourse. And they want to change it from the white heterosexual man to an intersectional subject who is many things at once. So they have a critique of identity politics, as does Srnicek and Williams, and as does Mark Fisher, and as do the right accelerationists. I find that really interesting that all of those groups who differ on every other subject all have a critique of identity politics as it's formulated on things like Tumblr, etc. And it's not because they don't identify with being queer or being marginalized, being POC. They do, they're writing from that position, but they want a new universalism, a new concept of rationality, a new version of what to do with technology and what the aims and ends of technology are for. They want to harness technology for a feminist cause, basically. And this is kind of the feminist, accelerationist left pose. And there are a lot of people who make artwork from this. They are an art group. And I'm going to show you a musician who makes music from this position. And this was a video that came out 2 years ago. And Holly Herndon is a composer. And she wrote this album explicitly, she talks about it from the left accelerationist position, which is interesting, and I've been trying to go back and forth about what that means. And part of what it means is that if you listen to it, all the instruments are digital. A lot of the vocal effects, not her voice, but a lot of the vocals that she's manipulating are found on the internet in like YouTube videos. The video is really influenced by post-humanist aesthetics. How they're using fake, she's using fake pop-up, like video advertisements. It's like retaining the idea of capital, retaining these like commercial relationships, even as it's using them aesthetically for her. What's interesting in her song is that there's not, for instance, there's not lyrics and there's not a story. There's not a human that we're seeing in it. It's not a piece of music that is someone telling us a normal kind of story. This could be background music in an elevator, or it could be music that exists maybe when humans don't exist in a sense. Everything that we're hearing is digital, nothing is organically made or recorded. It all comes out of computer programs and sampling on the internet. And then she's, manipulating it in certain ways. Okay. I'm going to show you a couple other examples of things that people have used these kind of ideas to make artwork out of. This is a piece that was at the Berlin Biennale in 2016, and what it is, I don't know if you guys know this artist, he's kind of famous for taking pictures of drones, but what this is that this is a Tor router, I guess. And when you're in the gallery, you can connect online to it, and it'll anonymize you and make it so that you're completely digitally secure through that. So he worked with somebody from the Tor project who works with Julian Assange to make this. So it's a sculpture, but